Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Good morning. Good morning. Wow, so happy. All
And
right. Yeah, another sunny Saturday, and we have Bruce back. Cool. All right, let's move forward.
Yep. Hi everyone. Thank you for tuning in and joining us on a Saturday morning. So I'm Jiaxing from the Google Developer Relations team. And just to give a bit of background of what Google Developer Space is for those who are not familiar with it. So we have a physical space in the Google Singapore office, but due to COVID, everything moved online. So that's how we started this YouTube channel, which you are probably tuning in from. So yeah, do subscribe and keep updated with us. We regularly host events with developers and startup communities. And Julius and Wei Yuan are no stranger to you folks. Yeah, they have been bringing awesome speakers and awesome content to you. So yeah, really excited to have Bruce from Netflix sharing his journey and more with us today.
so as with all other events, a big thank you for all the different communities that have been sharing our events. And in the past few weeks leading up to today's event. So for other communities who might be tuning in today, if you are interested in working with us, do let us know. Like you can see our email over there, singaporegdg@gmail.com. And as always, our social media stuff. Usually we post our latest news on these different websites. Like for example, our first one, that's our new main site for a lot of our events, and we actually put our, like for example, for today's event, you can check that website. You'll see that the upcoming event that is actually listed at the top itself. And we also update our Facebook page a lot. So if you want to attend any of our future events, and like let's say if you find today's events interesting, you can actually just follow our page. We'll update that page accordingly when we have details on our future events, and then you will know that okay, there's this event coming up, let me sign up for it. So a lot of good stuff via our different channels, and of course also our GDG Singapore community, which we originated from, and our YouTube channel for viewing all our past content, like what you're going to see for Bruce talk today. In fact, he's actually coming in for the second time. You can actually also go to that YouTube channel and see his previous talk as well. And remember to subscribe.
Yep, similar to what Wei Yuan has shared. So, yeah, on top of subscribing to Big O and GDG Singapore, do subscribe to Google Developer Space channel as well. So, the first link is our website. So, you will also find that we have a mailing list. So, we send out monthly newsletters to let you know what are the upcoming events for the month. So, do keep updated with us through that. And we are also on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube.
And so the event. So I think as some of you who are familiar with the format of our event, we actually stream to multiple YouTube channels at once. So hi to the guys. Mainly I can see a lot of you guys are on the Google Developer Space YouTube channel. But for those who are on the GDG Singapore or in GDG Philippines, hi to you guys as well. If you have any questions for today's events, right? So if you're on YouTube on any of these three channels, you can actually put in your question on the chat window. So if you have any questions at any point of time, you can actually just put that in. Those questions will come into our interface, and we'll, during the Q&A later on, we'll actually be able to surface your questions. So a very big welcome again for all of you who are tuning in on this early Saturday morning. We're gonna have a very exciting event today. And as always, we want to look out for new speakers in the community. We've been doing a lot of these different events for for Big O. We have our speakers on certain parts of the topics that we work on, but there's also other parts of our GDG community, like for GDG Singapore, GDG Cloud Singapore, where they cover things like Android, cloud, Kotlin, so on and so forth. And if you are someone who are working for a company who have been working on some very innovative technologies, or you're working on like some open source project and you want to share this knowledge with the community, this is a channel or avenue for you to do so. So definitely check out that link. There's this form that you'll be able to put in your particulars, and once we go through your proposal on your upcoming talk, we'll keep in touch with you and find out how we can best collaborate with you. So if you're interested in doing public speaking and reaching out to the rest of the community, definitely check out that link over there.
Cool. And this is the part where we glorify our sponsor. I'm in the Hubble office right now, and yes, they're providing our salary and they're also sponsoring this venue. So I think most of you might probably know already, those who are following us in our past events. We are a construction tech company. We are hiring, blah blah blah, looking for software engineers and so forth. Hubble was built. Joe at Changi was actually built using Hubble. You have other interesting projects like Razer HQ that you're seeing right now. It's also using Hubble to build it. Punggol Digital District, as you all might know, it's using Hubble as well. So if you're interested to join us, or you have friends who are interested to join us, we are looking for software engineers in Singapore, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Philippines. So please do reach out to us if you're interested to join. That said, we have Android. For a very long time, we haven't really had an Android event, and actually, one of the audience is going to host Android. This guy. Thank you. So please watch out. There will be some announcements later on. So yeah. With that, ta-da! Yeah, somebody last time was asking for this. Hopefully, you're happy now. All right. In any event, this is the time where we introduce Bruce. Bruce is no stranger to us. He spoke to us last, I think it was August or September last year, where he, kind of talk about, the career journey, how you become a senior software engineer, and now he's back to kind of have a bit more exposure to his journey and his experience being a CTO, being a director of engineering in small and big companies. And without further ado, let's bring in Bruce. Hi, Bruce.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. Welcome back.
Yeah, Julius, I'm wondering, are they hiring VPEs too? Do you know?
As long as it's not to replace me, it's okay.
I was just playing with it. Cool. We get started?
All right, handing it over to you.
All right. So my talk is called Climbing Ladders or Scaling Walls. And let's go start a little bit about me. So Bruce Wang, I live in San Francisco with my wife, who's a teacher, and my daughters are 9 and 7. About 20 plus years of industry experience, mostly in B2B companies. 15 years as a software developer. I've done Java, Python, Ruby, Elixir, Golang. 10 years as an engine leader, or what I would call a humble gardener. That's from a book called Team of Teams. Was a pretty good book about leadership. A 2-time founder of startups, 1 exit and 1 failure. And then I also am a mentor and advisor on Plato, HQ, Enrich. And then I also have a personal Calendly where I meet with people here and there. All right. So, really today I wanted to talk about my personal journey and then talk about some of the engineering career models that I've seen on that journey and then some lessons learned. So hopefully this will be good for everyone. So I'm going to start out first, kind of give you a background going way back. I mean, this dates me, but I was a student at University of Michigan from 96 to 2000. I was an intern my sophomore and junior year, so 97, 98. At 97, I was a local software company. I was an individual contributor. And so if you see, the green is basically what I did, and then the red is my title, right? And so I wanted to give you an idea of the titles that I've had and also what I've done, right? And so when I graduated from college, I became a software engineer at a startup called Marimba. Company size was roughly 200 with about 50 engineers, and I was just an individual contributor working on Java. I was promoted to a senior software engineer, and then I continued to work for a couple more years. And then in 2004, I co-founded a company called Twistage. And it was basically 3 of us for 2 years with no funding. And then slowly we built up the business. It never got big. So you could see that the biggest size of the company was 12. It was roughly, like 8 engineers. And then mostly what I did there was an IC, built up the original platform. We first built a P2P CDN based off BitTorrent. Then we sort of pivoted to build a video sharing site, and then pivot again to become a B2B OVP or online video platform. And most of the time I was a developer. Even when I had a small team, I led like QA, DevOps, support. It was really only a 3-person team, and I was a pretty hands-on leader. I still was coding most of the time. So I did that for about 9 years. And then in 2013, we sold the company to Lexmark, a subdivision of Lexmark called Perceptive Software. And so from 2013, 2016, I worked there. I retained my title of director of engineering, but then I actually applied to a different group and became director of cloud services, which was effectively an entire division which owned all the different cloud services, hosted in a data center as well as true SaaS. And so Lexmark was about 10,000 people. The software division about 2,000. It was probably 500 engineers in the software group. I don't know the exact numbers. And there I was a people leader, and purely people leader, and to only managers too. So it was manager and managers. And so you can kind of see when I transitioned to Lexmark, we got acquired, and then I got an opportunity. What's really interesting is when I became a leader and I had, managed a team of 60 to 55 managers, I ran my own P&L. That was really appealing to me, is having my own profit loss, in charge of revenue and costs and sort of that whole thing. And I owned that whole group. And so it was a really, really good opportunity for me career-wise. And that's why I sort of took that leap, and it was a big difference. I never led a team of that size before, and it was a really good opportunity. And so that's why I took it. So you could see, what that looks like. Then after that, I sort of, you kind of see start switching positions quite a bit. I left Lexmark to become CTO of a local startup in Kansas City, called Brightergy. They did basically a commercial solar, and they built a software platform to measure, sort of how much solar generation, and then also get into temperature controls and stuff like that. And so in there, it was a 100-person company. The team was roughly 15, but eventually kind of shrunk it down to 5 engineers and 1 designer. And once again, I was a hands-on leader there. And really, when I made the transition for 2 reasons. One is Lexmark. When I was director of cloud services, it was too far removed from development, and it wasn't even in an engineering team. It was in a services org, So, and so it was kind of too much for me, and I really wanted to get back to technology. And also, the company kind of shifted its focus, and cloud wasn't a big thing anymore. So I really, I went there and joined there because I thought that could really push our cloud strategy. And there I was in Kansas City. So earlier for Lexmark, I moved to Kansas City from San Francisco. And then Sync FM was a startup based in Norway. And, they wanted to start a small team in San Francisco. So it's up, and I wanted to move back. They were going to be in a kind of a cool shared space called HeavyBit. And so it was a really good opportunity for me. Brightergy actually spun off to become its own business, and the founder had asked me to take on the CTO position there, but I decided to kind of switch positions at Sync. And as you can see, it was a pretty small startup. At the biggest, it was 5 engineers and 1 support person. And once again, I was a hands-on leader there, managed the team, grew the team, hired everyone there, but then also wrote a lot of the software. And that was mostly Golang and Elixir. And then that business failed. That was my, I was sort of like promoted to co-founder as a title, and we'll talk about that later. But it failed, and then I was looking for a job, and at that point it was, I was really thinking like, what should I do, right? Should I be an IC? Should I be a people leader? Interviewed at several different places, and then finally settled at a company called Packet. They did bare metal provisioning, basically an API for bare metal servers. It was a pretty good opportunity there. Going back to people leadership and focus on that. And, and this is where I've been there, like chasing the title, right? Like I was CTO, and obviously I was small companies, and I didn't know if I wanted to just go back to like engineer or IC or even just a manager. And this is an opportunity for me to get a VP title at a bigger company, and a little more well-known. There's a hardware company, but still fairly well-known. And actually Packet exited and sold to Equinix. So, it's now part of Equinix bare metal now. So it was, pretty hot startup, and I joined it, and I didn't really stay very long. I had 3 teams there, 15 engineers. And then, once again, this company was in New York, and I would have to fly there a lot. And I was like, I really want to work for like a traditional Silicon Valley startup that's raised like Series A and B from like really well-known investors. And, Packet did raise from like Dell and SoftBank and stuff like that. So it wasn't like, it did raise from well-known people. But, Shippo had like kind of all the credentials, right? Union Square Ventures and all that stuff. So I joined as senior director of engineering there. And there, you see like the title shift, even though the company's the same. There was already a VPE. So, she was the one who hired me. And so they gave me a senior director of engineering title. And then there I was a people leader again, and then of just ICs. Right. And you can see it's about 3 teams, 10 engineers. The company size is about 200 with about 25 to 30 engineers. And then now to my present, which is director of engineering at Netflix. Netflix is roughly 10,000 people with 2,000 plus engineers. I'm a people leader and purely focused on people leadership. ICs and managers report to me. And then I have 3 teams, 1 manager, 13 engineers. One thing is like Netflix is well known for its like talent density. And I only manage pretty senior engineers. Like I think they probably be principal engineers in most places, but we don't have titles. So everyone's a senior engineer. But most of the people in my team have like 10 plus years experience, right? And wide variety of experience as well. So that's kind of roughly my journey, and sort of what took me. It gave you a little background on what took me there. Netflix should be obvious why I picked Netflix. I mean, I did 2 video startups. Netflix is a company that I really respected for a really long time, and I really wanted to see what it was like in person. And then being here and seeing the culture firsthand has been amazing for me and my experience. And what's really interesting is it's pretty rare for a lateral move from director to director, right? Because most of the time, if you come from a startup, even VPs might get a manager position at a larger company, right? And it was just really probably alignment of the stars, like what the person was looking for, my boss was looking for, and my experience was in APIs, and he wanted a person to run the API systems team. It was all ICs, not managers, that person had to lead. So if you were a traditional director at a larger company, you probably were leading only managers. And so I think I fit sort of like the profile, perfectly, and why I was able to actually get a director level position there. And so, it is uncommon that happens. But in this case, it happened just based on my experience, and also just what I've done in the past. So, all right, so that's a little bit about my journey. And then you might ask, what's next? Right now I'm staying in my current company and grow my impact, and that's what I'm doing. I'm loving my job. I love my team, and I love what I do. It's super challenging. It's definitely the hardest, most impactful job I've ever done in my life, and so I love it. But I ask myself, what happens in 3 to 5 years? Do I want to start another company? Do I want to become VPE somewhere else? Maybe aim for VP at Netflix. Do I become a CEO of a smaller company? Do I explore IC director at Netflix? We don't have titles, but there is a kind of a secret title. Or do I aim for like working at a VC or something? That's something that I've actually thought about in the past, because I really like advising companies and founders. And really, it's like, I don't know. It's unclear to me right now what I really want to do. So for me, it's really about, I'm really happy where I'm at, and I'm okay. So the next part I'm going to talk about is like company models. And what I mean by company models is really like, as an engineer and you want to grow your career, what are the type of opportunities you would get at companies to do that, right? And so I'm going to give you a chart that I call YOLO to Fellow. And what I mean by that, YOLO, you could probably guess what that means. And Fellow is sort of this like title you get at very large companies, very well known. And you look at this spectrum, right? Sync was probably the most YOLO. Twisted and Brightergy was kind of on a little over. Pack and a Shippo were more kind of in the middle, you expect. Marimba was definitely much more traditional. Netflix is a really interesting place. It's kind of like in between YOLO and Fellow, and I'll talk about that later. And then finally, there's Lexmark, which actually had like fellows. They had like people had been there for 20, 30 years, and I still remember being in a room with like 4 fellows from Lexmark, which is a super big deal. I mean, there's like a picture of all the fellows there, and it was a big deal to be like technical person who could grow and stay in that for a long time, right? And meeting with them was really cool to just like meet like these 4 fellows at Lexmark. And Lexmark spun off from IBM, and you can kind of see that model. So let me talk a little bit more deeper about this. YOLO, as you expect, it's really great for when you're starting out. Takes no work to implement. That's the best part of it. It literally takes nothing to implement. I'm going to turn on the light so it's not all shadowy on me. Yeah, that doesn't look that great. Anyways, so like, the problem is it just doesn't scale well, right? Like, you could sort of just wing it and hire whoever you can get. And then compensation obviously is all over the board. You're just sort of picking out of a hat, like, oh, I like you. What do you make? I'll give you, 5% more, or I'll give you 20% less, but I'll give you shares, right? And typical company size is 1 to 50. And then where I've worked, Twisted Sync, Brightergy were probably in this like space. And Brightergy had much more titles in the other businesses. I just mean in the technology group itself, right? So the next step after that is what I call the titles galore company. And so what this means is like you get a little bigger, you start waving titles around, you're trying to attract people. You got like different titles. You might not even thought about like how you get to each title. You're just like, hey, you want to be VP? You want to be senior VP? Oh, you want to be senior engineer, principal engineer? All right, great. Roughly, I think you're there, right? And, it's very flexible on what you work on. So that's good. And titles, allow you to like move around, and you can potentially track people based on the titles. Some people want that senior engineer, principal, staff title. And that's a way that you can attract the talent. But you have effectively title inflation. And with title inflation, it basically means the titles are worthless, right? Like you can't even calibrate. You don't know the true skill levels. And, compensation, once again, is all over the board. It's sort of like based on what you have. And I think typical sizes 10 to 200 companies I worked at, Twisted Sync, Prodigy again, and then Packet, packet, like I got a VP's title because, it's like, oh yeah, I want a VP. And then it's like, okay, I'm going to hire another VP that then these VPs report to. And it was like, the titles like didn't matter as much. And when I took over the engineering team, I wanted to like figure out what is the levels that we want. And how do you grow into those levels? And like, how many do we have, right? And so we started like figuring it out a little bit more, which leads to kind of the more traditional thing that you hear that most startups are in is structure leveling. You have thought out levels from like, SWE 1 to 3, then you have tech lead and senior principal. And, the compensation is pretty calibrated, right? It's based, hey, if you're in this level, you're going to make this much, and in this band, you're going to make this much. Because it's fairly standard, you're going to have a ton of examples of this model, right? And if you're an engineer in this level, and you're probably in this kind of experience, then you're going to be, you're kind of going to be in a very set mode of growing, right? Now, what I think doesn't work is it doesn't really work with really senior engineers. It doesn't really handle market value well. And then a lot of times the manager and technical tracks are not clear or even muddled, right? Sometimes you'll see companies where the structure leveling, the technical lead is actually a level to get to manager, right? Which is a little weird because, you really want to have split tracks. And usually teams, as they get bigger, they will start fragmenting. But based on how, your team does it, you might have to, being on the manager track might require you to be a tech lead, or sometimes it's a different position. And here, you're going to probably see like 50 to 1,000 people. Marimba and Shippo were in this world. Marimba, the founders came from Sun, and so they obviously had a really set leveling structure, and it was really clear on like how to get to the levels. I don't know if it's like super clear, but like, they definitely had like specific like senior, software senior principal and things like that. And what's really interesting is when I got promoted to senior engineer at Marimba, a coworker of mine a friend of mine was like, "You got to senior?" And it's because at that company, senior was higher than principal, right? It was like senior or higher than staff. It was like senior staff and then software staff and then senior. And so he was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you got senior title." I'm like, no, that's like the one after software engineer, right? And so it varies, right? And I'll talk a little bit that later. And examples of other companies, I'm pretty sure most Series A or above companies are in this world, right? The next is path to fellow, right? This is sort of like the distinguished engineer path, the like really well thought out delineated tracks between management and technical, right? And you have people like engineers that will report to like VPs. You have like engineers that are effectively at the same level as VP or SVP. And bigger companies just have to do this, right? Because you want to retain talent and you want to be able to have a clear path, right? I look at a big advantage is growth is effectively unlimited, right? Like you could be hired from intern all the way to your retirement as a fellow or senior fellow or distinguished or whatever you call it, right? But there's a big disadvantage, which is title chasing. In a big firm with really clear set levels, you're going to have a lot of title chasing. And you could potentially even have misaligned incentives. You might do stuff because you want to get that next title. You want to get that next run, right? And you'll probably see this typically in 5,000 plus companies. I worked at Lexmark, was a company that did this. And then pretty much every other huge company like Google, IBM, Oracle, any of those, Facebook, stuff like that, they're going to have very clear levels, right? And so, this is like what typically you'll see when you get to a certain size. And the last but not least is Netflix, what I call the Netflix way. I don't know what other to call it, right? Which is we don't have engineering titles. We have senior engineer, and that's it. There's nothing else. Now, there is one title above called IC director, but it's pretty rare. Mostly every engineer is just called a senior software engineer, right? And we hire people with the right mix of experience, maturity. It's not necessarily just about the years, but it's just about like the maturity and like what you've been through and like kind of life experience, right? Another thing is it kind of, really combines like YOLO and fellow, where growth is really up to you because you're not worried about titles. You can sort of figure out where you want to grow. And there's a lot of freedom to the hiring manager because you kind of look for the right skill set. And compensations really kind of figure it out to like the manager, right? I mean, we have support from talent, but it's really not based on titles. When I hire, I'm hiring in for a senior software engineer, but I look at a wide variety, right? Like every title you can think of. When I recruit, it doesn't really almost matter. It's just more matters like, is that the skill set I want, right? And then you basically comp based on that. And so there's some disadvantage actually in our model, and we're still looking to address it. There's kind of a lack of defined IC growth, right? You don't have exact like, what do I have to do to get here and here and here? There's not like a tiering, right? Which some people, like to know kind of what path they're on. There's a lack of talent mobility because almost every team is hiring for their team. It's not a centralized hiring. It's kind of hard to move people around because like, what I look for is different from what someone else looks for. You can't really transfer skills. And because you don't have a way to level people up, there's no way to be like, okay, I hired a distributed API engineer. I want to move them to like algo engineering. How do I even do that? Because algo engineering is going to hire only senior people, and API engineering is only going to hire senior distributed engineers. So do I even have space for like a junior engineer, if you will, right? And growth could be capped. This is what's interesting is like, well, the whole reasons why we don't have titles is because compensation isn't capped. But growth potentially could be capped. I mean, this could be also because of our size, but there are cases where we lose people to Facebook or a bigger company because they have sort of more defined tiers, a higher level tier that offers impact. Have this like E6, E7 level that is like super, super high, where you have like broad impact, and it's very clear, right? A typical size, I don't know. Like I know of Netflix, and then I know of Automatic. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of companies that follow this, and it's an interesting model. I love it. I think it's a great model, but you have to be really careful about it because if you don't do it right, it just becomes YOLO. And then it just doesn't mean anything, and so doing it right obviously really matters. So these are kind of like the different things that I've seen in my personal career, but I'm going to address the elephant in the room, right? Which is, isn't this all about just compensation? And I would say, yeah, kind of. I mean, if that's what you're looking for, yeah, like title chasing and looking at what level you want to be at. Because so much of compensation is tied to titles, and you look at people leadership tracks, it's like, right, manager, senior manager, director, VP, EVP, SVP, whatever, you get paid more as you move up, right? And so a lot of what people do and companies do is all about like figuring out what the comp is, right? And if you're going to grow, aren't you going to optimize the most for comp? And I would say maybe. I mean, the climbing ladders and scaling walls example is to say, impact and things like that, which eventually leads to comp, is not always a clear road, right? It's not always a tiered structure that's very, very clean. So yes, compensation potentially is, if you're going to optimize for it, there might be a formula which you want to go for. But I would argue that like that's probably not what you should be going for. And here's some lessons for your career based on sort of what I've seen as a hiring manager, as a personal engineer who's grown. This is kind of my own opinions of I think what you should think about. The first one is there is no one path. If someone told you there's an exact path of here's how you get to here, to here, to here, to here, they're lying to you in the sense that like it's so different, right? Each company is going to have the different models, titles and stuff like that is not necessarily always aligned. And you could go all sorts of stuff. You could say, hey, I want to go technical all the way and never want to leave. But then you can jump around and kind of follow that track. You could dip your toes into management, come back, which I've seen at bigger companies. You could go into a people leader path or an accidental manager where you you're a good engineer, you have all these skills, and then they're like, oh, why don't you lead a team? And then you accidentally become leading a project, leading a team, and all of a sudden you're a manager. And also you might just want to be a founder, and you like combination of being technical and people management, and you love that space of 5 to 10, 20, 100 engineers. That's what you love. And so I wanted to say there is no one path, right? There's no one track that you can go on and it will just work. Each individual company might have a path, but from a career perspective, I think it's pretty hard to nail down one specific path that you can take. And there really isn't a formula. Second is non-technical skills are critical regardless of path. Doesn't matter if you're going to go to people leadership, you're going to go into technical leadership, your path to fellow, you're going to need a lot of skills, right? And here's the biggest misnomer. When I say communication skills, I don't mean presentation, right? I think a lot of people think, oh, I need to be good at presentation. No, not necessarily. Or I need to be outgoing. That's not what I mean. I mean, are you concise and succinct, right? Are you able to convey your ideas effectively, right? Can you listen and understand? How's your written and verbal, communication skills? There's all sorts of things you have to be really good at. And it doesn't really matter if you want to go down technical or people. This is a critical skill. Additionally, you have to have good product and business sense. You just have to, right? To be a great engineer, in my mind, you have to understand what you're building for and the business and the product. You have to understand your business model. You have to understand your cost model, right? If you don't, you're just going to miss a huge chunk of what's going on. It doesn't matter if you're people or technical. You have to be good at conflict resolution. Can you give candid feedback, right? Can you resolve conflicts effectively? Can you be a broker of conversations? Can you figure out why there's a conflict and try to break down the tasks and solve the tasks, right? There's all sorts of stuff that you have to be good at, and when you deal with a lot of people, you're going to have to be good at conflict resolution. Another one you're going to have to really get at is prioritization and focus, right? How do you focus on things? How do you prioritize when you have a lot of stuff to do? How do you decide which one to do? The skill is extremely important. Doesn't matter what path you're going to take. And EQ, I think, you might think, oh, EQ is something you're born with. I don't think so. It's can you listen, right? Do you have an active listening model? Do you have a learner's mindset? Are you curious? Can you empathize with your partners or your colleagues, right? Can you sort of be a little more vulnerable and say, hey, maybe I don't know everything, and I can learn, right? And I don't think that's just you're born with that skill, right? I think all humans pretty much have a learner's mindset, right? That's how we grow. So it's how good are you at that and using that, listening and really understanding the other side, right? That obviously helps with conflict resolution as well. But these non-technical skills are super important for your growth. Doesn't matter which track you're going to go on, right? Next one is, it's your career for sure, but your manager and the support structure of that company really matters, right? Based on what model your company employs and the structure that they have, it can really affect how you grow, right? You noticed I was in a startup, and then I was at a super tiny company, and then I went to Lexmark. It was a gigantic company. It was a very, very big difference for me. But it also was a huge learning opportunity for me, right? And they had a great support structure. Where I even got the concept of climbing ladders versus scaling walls is from a training session at Lexmark, where they talked about the specific thing. Are you climbing ladders, trying to hit some rung of mythical title, or are you really looking at opportunities to grow in different ways? You might be going down and up and down and up. And I still remember the example the VP of talent told me where a woman who just kind of did her thing and wanted to learn and did a bunch of businesses and saw her friends, climb that ladder and then hit a peak, and then she was able to like go 2-3 rungs above because the breadth of experience she had was like amazing. I still remember that story, and that was like 8 years ago, right? And so, this really matters. Your manager really matters for your career growth, and the support structure of the company really matters, right? There's a famous saying, which is people don't quit their company, they quit their managers, right? And I think that's mostly true. I don't think it's always true because there's also the company structure and how that fits in your needs. And how much support do you need in your career, right? Where are you in your career? It could be that you need that like really structured model to help you figure it out. Or maybe you kind of want to be in a YOLO environment where you could do whatever, right? That really matters too. And figuring out what you need is going to be important. The other thing is, I really think you should chase impact and not titles, right? This is my personal opinion. Of course, I could say that even though I chased titles before. And surely you could do that if that's you're optimizing for compensation, prestige, whatever. But what I want to say is like think about the work you do and how it affects your colleagues, team, and company. Like, are you making an impact? Are you making impact on your colleagues? Are you making impact on your company? And as you do and create greater impact, typically compensation follows, right? And yes, there's a lot of things you have to do, to get noticed. But I think if you chase the impact and learning, it could be a better model than just chasing the titles, right? Are you happy at what you do? What if you're like climbing that ladder and you're just not happy, right? And you're just not satisfied with what you're working on? Could you also learn if you went into another role where you're more of a beginner, right? What if like you're a senior engineer, in UI design, but you kind of want to become a junior engineer in back-end systems, right? Like that's a totally valid career path. I have people on my team who's like mobile engineer for like 6-7 years of their life and then went back and distributed systems and APIs. And they're a fantastic engineer because they've seen both sides. And they've also worked at startups and they worked at big companies, right? And the titles vary so much between companies. It's really hard to calibrate and be like, okay, what title am I aiming for? Because you could be a VPE at some startup where they have title inflation, and then you try to go join a big company or a different company, it's just not going to match. So if you chase the titles, it may not work. And what's really funny is if you chase the title at a big company, you get to a certain level, sometimes startups might not want you because it's like, all right, you've been a director or VP at this huge company, and all you've done is ran like managers, and you're in the system and you're in the product process, and you don't know how to adjust. And I've seen that happen, or candidates get rejected because they're like too senior, or their title is like too high, and it's like they can't move around, right? They can't jump back down and be a hands-on engineer or hands-on leader or something like that, where sometimes a startup may need that, right? And so I think in the end, the last thought is, what are you optimizing for, right? When you're climbing ladders versus scaling walls, where you're going up and down trying to find the right foothold to get to that next run, you might be surprised where you end up, right? So that's it. That's my talk. I think we're now moving to the Q&A.
All right, cool. Thank you, Bruce. Okay, Wei Yuan is missing, but it's okay. He will come back.
Technical issues.
Yeah.
See, I got good internet, but now Wayne Yun's disappeared. So there's no bad connection this time. So.
Okay, cool. All right, so maybe we can start off with one of the questions from the audience. There was a question about how should I say, education. So maybe to I read it out, and then maybe to give Bruce some context as well. So the person who asked the question was a graduate of Polytechnic University, and then So she's asking about applying for technical jobs and how she can compete against, degree holders. So in Singapore, how should I say? People are judged by their education.
Mm, right.
So there's a certain discrepancy in terms of how people hire. So do you have any thoughts around it?
Yeah, I mean, there's companies here, right, that look for a specific school. Did you go to like Ivy League? Did you, go to a well-known school? I mean, I was lucky that Michigan is a pretty well-known engineering school in the United States. I think it's actually known internationally as well. Um, but what's funny is technical is probably one of those few places where your degree almost doesn't matter. And look, obviously, if you have companies that only care about degrees, then yes, that's going to be hard. But technology and like being technical, it's so not related necessarily. I'll tell you this. I advise students. I interview students who want to apply to Michigan, right? And what I tell all of them, every single one, is like, doesn't matter you get a computer engineer, you need to get internships. Because what really matters is experience. Is what experience do you have in coding? What experience do you have? What have you seen? And yes, maybe sometimes it's hard to get in those right opportunities if you don't have that right degree. But technology is such a different world. Like with open source projects now, you can contribute, you can learn, you can be like a player and not be known at all, right? Like I think there's a really famous story with Firefox. It was like some 50-year-old engineer or some really well-known engineer, and they were comparing with someone who's like basically building Firefox. And then when they met, it was like he was like 17 or 19 or something like that. Like he was like shocked. He's like, wait, what? You were like a little kid. And I think what I want to reemphasize is like if you have a good manager who knows what they're looking for in hiring, they would not look at a degree. I don't look at degrees. I actually sometimes want to look for one of my best stories for my team. I didn't hire her, but she actually doesn't have an engineering degree, and I think that's great. She's like got a sales experience, a marketing experience, but then she like taught herself coding, and she's a fantastic engineer. Because remember the non-technical skills, you need that to be a great engineer, and you could read code. Like you can. What I mean is you could read like manuals, and you can grow, and you got to practice the craft, right? And so I feel like if you practice and you learn coding and you figure out what languages you think you should have and you just get better and better at that, that's what ultimately people are going to respect. And I think technology is one of the few fields where it doesn't matter actually what you have. That's my viewpoint.
Cool. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Bruce. I have a question I want to ask. So I read recently about this article, and the person was saying that when you're first starting out in your career, he recommends that you work for a more well-known company because of this thing called the halo effect. So let's say you work at this really well-known company, then when you apply for other jobs, they'll be like, oh, you work at company A, you are probably a good engineer. So what are some thoughts you have on career paths for probably fresh graduates? Would you recommend them to work at startups or big companies? So I think one of the questions asked the same thing. What are the risks of joining startups and small companies?
Yeah. Well, I mean, absolutely. I'll admit it. Like, if you look at my resume before Netflix, I didn't have a brand name company. But like Lexmark is not really well known for software. And it really was hard on me to like, man, I don't have that. Am I good, right? Enough. And the Netflix opportunity came out of nowhere and I had to take it. And I actually did not think I would get it. Like I was like, I just assumed I was gonna get it. And then I was like, and I was ready to, when my boss called me, I was like, I had this whole speech of like, hey, if you have manager positions, I'll take a manager position at Netflix, not a director if you have those. And then he offered me, I was like, wait, what?
Wow.
Because I didn't think, I actually almost didn't go through with it because I'm like, I don't know if I can get past this. I used to be really afraid of like the coding exams of like big company. Google's famous for like their interviews, and it was really tough. And so I would say like, yeah, I mean, this goes back to the prestige, right? The halo effect is absolutely real. But what's funny is I've heard of stories of startup people who try to hire like an engineer from a big company, and they were a disaster because they only know how to work in that tier, and they can't like change. They don't have a learner's mindset. They're almost like too qualified for that position, but not flexible enough to move around. And so it's really hard. I'd love to say, oh, do join startups. It's amazing. Do that. Yeah, of course the risk is going to fail, and then you'll be out on the street. But you could also work for. I mean, here's what's really funny is I was talking to the Y Combinator people, and this guy was in the same class as Airbnb. That first whole course, like the famous one, right? Where like all the ones, but he was saying how like, I think he did okay. But like a regular engineer that just joined Airbnb is like worth millions and millions. Like he's like, oh, I could have just been a software engineer at Airbnb early, and I would have made a ton of money, right? And so it's like, it's also like you don't know which one you're gonna work for. Like you don't know if it's gonna be huge. I still remember my coworker. My really good friend. He's probably one of the smartest engineers I've ever met in school. This is 99, 2000. And he got an offer at LoudCloud, which was the most famous company in the Valley because started by Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz, who's now, famous. This is the most famous company in the Valley. And so he joined it. The company he didn't want to interview at was a small company called Google that he was like, I don't know if I want to, it's like some random people over there doing search. I don't know. And so you don't know what you're going to hit and what opportunities you may miss if you go join a startup and they have a great business. And so you don't get those opportunities very often, right? And yes, picking startups is very hard. So I don't know, like what if you end up working for a company that actually becomes Airbnb, and then you have the prestige and now you have the experience of growing a company and being there early on. I mean, that's amazing. You don't get that experience very much, right? So I can't answer that. It's really up to you. And you look at my career, I sort of ended up at a big company and it was great. Like, yeah, it took me 20 years and, but it was, it was a great journey.
Wow. So in summary, if you join a startup, you either risk being out on the streets or have the opportunity to be part of the next Google.
Yeah, there's nothing in between. No, there's so many things in between. And look, I remember I said earlier, it really matters who your manager is. I've heard of so many companies where like, oh my God, like why would you want to work for this old school company? But then they work for a great manager, great product, and it was amazing. And you work for the shiny, Google, whatever, but then you work at a specific subdivision, terrible manager, you don't get any experience. And yeah, you might get that halo effect for the interview. And then later on, you realize you actually have no good skills because ultimately you don't have the right manager and leader that took your growth, right? So it's hard to say because, you can also say, oh, Google versus Adobe, which one should I work for? And it's like, well, who's your manager? What product are you working on? I mean, those matter. Yeah.
I think we just have a follow-up question. So initially you were sharing about how your manager reached out to you over the phone to let you know that you actually got the role. So I think it also shows a bit of an imposter syndrome. So we have a question from registration. So how do you deal with imposter syndrome as a manager? Do you run into extreme self-doubt, anxiety? How do you deal with it?
Oh yeah. Dude, everyone, I would tell you this is the craziest. This is insane, right? I hired this amazing engineer from Amazon, and I brought him specifically because he had like GraphQL experience, and like he was like, "Oh, I have so much imposter syndrome here," and I was like, "What? Like, how could?" He's an amazing engineer. Like he's so good, and he has imposter. I'm like, okay, if you have imposter syndrome, then we should all have it. Like, I don't know what we should do, right? And I think everyone does. I mean, it's a positive because when you're around a lot of great people and great engineers, and how do you manage a team that's way better than you, right? That I saw that was one of the questions. Absolutely. And here's the thing, though. Do you know when I became a great manager at Netflix? When I got over the fact that it's at Netflix. Like the moment I got over the fact that, oh my God, I'm here. Do I know what I'm doing? Oh my God, is this the right experience? And I got to like, it's just people, partners. It's the same thing. It's literally the same thing. Yes, it's crazy scale, same problems, right? Same software problems, same people problems. What do you do about people who want to go career? Oh, you have conflict with these two people. What do we? Oh, you don't like that group. Like, it's the same problems. And the moment I got past the fact that, you know what, we don't know everything here. We're not like perfect. There's plenty of problems here. And actually, some of my skills and what I know is helpful. That's when it turned for me, when I became a more effective manager here. So that, like, absolutely, you go through self-doubt and worry. But if you don't get over that hump, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy where you could actually cause so much stress that you actually don't do the thing you need to do, which is get over and learn and grow, right? I got a lot of feedback early on. I took that and learned and grow. And I still am making mistakes, right? I'm not perfect. And what I realize is managers here aren't perfect either. It's not like, and that's the reality. Everyone, I think, is dealing with it one form or another. Oh, hey, look who's back.
Vivian is back.
Great to be back again. That was a really scary experience when you go live on stream and things don't work out. But yeah, so just to follow up on Jiaxing's question, so I think this is a really interesting one. This would be one of the challenges that you mentioned, in the case of imposter syndrome. Like, how do you overcome this when you are not an expert in the subject matter and you're leading a team in getting to that objective?
Welcome to my world. I manage basically 14 engineers who are probably one of the best in their field, right? Like, I have none of that experience they have. I haven't done Java in so long. That was definitely a big worry for me, right? And at Netflix, being a people leader here, you need to be a credible technical advisor, which means you need to be credible enough to like make sense, but there's not an expectation that you're in the code, right? And I got feedback early on from one of my engineers who's like, oh, I don't know if Bruce is technical enough to like talk about certain things, right? And so I think what you need to get over is like, that's not why you're here, right? You're not here to be the architect or the software engineer. Like, that's what you hire your team for, right? What you're here is to figure out, who do you need to hire? Who's in the right position? Are we working on the right projects? What's the priorities for the team? What's the vision for the team? Are we meeting the right partners? What's our reputation? Like how are people growing? Are they happy in their jobs? Like, what I realized when I took over this team is that a lot of the people pieces were not there. We didn't have a clear charter. We didn't have a good reputation, even though we're an amazing team. We didn't have a clear vision of what we want to be over the next 3 to 5 years, right? We weren't able to communicate effectively to our partners. We didn't bet on huge projects. So it's like what they needed was a leader to kind of give them like a personality and like push them in the right way. And I mean, I give the credit all to my team, right? But I feel like I've done a little bit to like lift them up and like put them in the right places and meet with the right other leaders and push for what we believe in. And so I think it goes back to like, think about a surgery team. I love using this example, right? Like, think about a team that has different people in it. You play a different role. Like the sports team, forget about surgery. Think about sports team. Why do you have a coach and you have the players? Is it expected that the coach gets out and starts playing? No, right? No one would ever expect that. And in some cases, if the coach was a player, they're actually worse as a coach than if they were just, because you play different roles, right? And that's what you have to remember. Like, you are trying to figure out, what is the structure? Who do you have? Are they working on the right stuff? Are they the right fit? Is this the right culture? These are the things you're hired to do as a manager. And so yes, the problem is, if you're a former technology leader, you're thinking about, how do I lead being not a software expert? But what you need to be is a people expert. Because that's not what they do. So if you become a people expert, then you bring the value to that team. So I think that's what you got to think about, is what value do you bring that's not necessarily technical. And I think technical, I've struggled with this, right? When I joined Shippo, one of the first things I did is move us to Circle CI, because I felt like, oh my God, I need to like prove my technical ability. So I'm going to take this super hard process that we never did, and I'm just going to do it myself, right? Like, Netflix, they don't expect you to do that. If you're doing that, you're doing a bad job, right? You're not doing your job. And so I feel like you got to think about what your role is, right? Yeah.
Thanks for the insightful answer.
Cool, thanks, Bruce. I guess to piggyback on that question as well. So earlier you mentioned that you had to manage profit and loss at Lexmark. Was there some form of a mindset shift, knowing that now you have to kind of manage it as an engineer?
Oh yeah. I mean, think about if now I look back, I'm like, are they crazy? They like took someone who like managed a 3-person team and made them run like a multi-million-dollar group with 60 people. Like, it wasn't 60 people in joint, it was 18, and then we built a bunch of acquisitions and but what I had was like the vision of what cloud services was going to be, right? And yes, we were a on-premise hosting, like not on-premise software that was hosted in the cloud that needs to move to SaaS, right? So the vision, like, they hired me for the vision. I introduced the concept of DevOps to them. They were like, what is DevOps? Right? And so I think they hired me for that reason, right? Not necessarily that I had all this experience. And so, yeah, once you have a budget and you have salespeople calling you, I had a whole group that managed that. And so one of the first things I did was figure out, okay, what teams do I have? Okay, I have cloud engineering, I have traditional managed services, and then I had like a group that handle like the finances and the organization and like the governance and stuff like that. So it's code in some ways, right? It's designing architecture, but people architecture and team architecture. And so, yeah, it was definitely hard, but it was an amazing experience because it really taught you about like dealing with customers and dealing with revenue and understanding the business, right? Really understanding the business and like depreciation of, because we bought gear. So you have to figure out depreciation, and you got to figure out like, what does that mean? And obviously, I'm not a financial expert. We just have to work with accounting people to help us run the numbers, right? And so this goes back to like, if you're in a company big enough where they're giving you control of P&L, you should have a team that can back you, right? And so, yeah, it's a huge shift because it wasn't even engineering anymore. This was a services team that was under the professional services, global services group. So we weren't actually even in engineering.
That makes sense. So in that case, right, as a follow-up, since you had to manage profit and loss, do you had to also kind of figure out how much salary people can get? How do you manage promotions? And like, because you have to manage your own scarcity.
No, so sorry. The P&L in that case, it wasn't a divisional P&L. It was just the business P&L, right? So like the people costs and what you can give is a corporate level decision, right? Like the levels that the people are in is what they would get, and then the amount of salary they would get would be based on some number. And yeah, I mean, it would obviously be part of my P&L, but like the P&L, like what didn't like super, it wasn't like I could just give them whatever, right? They still have to follow the corporate like framework, right? And this goes back to the very structured leveling, right? Like the title and what the title job code, like your job code really mattered. I had to create a DevOps job code at Lexmark because there was no way they could hire. They're like, why would we pay this person like engineer prices? Like, it's like, okay, this is a different role that they didn't even have. So they had to create a job code and attach it to a certain profile so they could pay people at that level. And so it was a corporate level thing. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thanks, Bruce.
I think we have a couple of questions coming in. They're really curious about how you determine whether you should stay in a technical role or go on to a manager role. So yeah, do you have any advice for that, Bruce?
Yeah. It's a tricky answer because like I don't know your circumstance, right? Because potentially like it's how you could get your raise, right? It's how you think you need to go to that next step. And so if you're in that situation, I can't answer that for you, right? But if you step back and think about why do you want to be a people leader? I actually had someone on my team who wanted to be a people leader. And that's what I asked her. I was like, what is it exactly? Like, get rid of the title. What is the job that you want to do exactly? Right? And if you start answering like, hey, I want like to grow people. I want to like understand hiring. I want to like run, like, do you actually want to be a people leader? Or is it because in your mind, you think manager is the next thing you should do? Right? And so I think that's what you should calculate. Like, what is it about the technical track you don't like? Is it the company doesn't have a good track? Or is it that the work isn't interesting? But then why would you move to people? Like, you could also change role. Like, that's the thing. You could also like switch to a different group or go back to a beginner and some other thing. And then you become like a learner again. Like, you don't necessarily have to. And I think the problem is you have that prestige ladder mindset, right? Oh, I'm a senior engineer. I have to be a manager over here. I can't go over here. Oh my God, that's going to be a junior engineer. Like, but I think this goes back to the climbing walls versus climbing ladders. Scaling walls or climbing ladders. Like, what are you optimizing for, right? And so I think you should really think about what is it exactly that you want to do, right? Like, what do you want to do in your career? What are you excited and passionate about? And frankly, there's a lot of crappy people managers because they don't want to be a people manager and they have no skill. Like, they were good technically and then they were put in a people role. And I just read this article, it was the best article ever, about how like this is why we have so many crappy people managers. It's because they get in that role and then you can't get them out. Because then they're like, I don't want to be downgraded. Now I'm a manager. I need to be a director now and a VP. And now you created a bunch of terrible managers, right? And so I would be very cautious about why do you actually want to do it. Be truthful. Do you actually, firing people is not easy. Hiring people is not easy. Having difficult conversations is not easy. That is not like fun. It's not like you have to do that, right? Divvying out salaries. If you work for a big environment, my manager I just hired from a well-known big company had to divvy out salaries to her best engineers, but like had to cut it up based on the like A, B levels, even though they were all awesome. Like, do you want to do that? How do you communicate to your C level who's performing at A level that they're only going to get C level salary? Do you really want to do that stuff? Like, I think you got to really ask yourself if that's what you want to do. And I mean, that's why I don't know if I want to do that. I might want to move back to like a technical leader track where it's more like not people leaders, but like project or big cross-cutting partner project stuff where my communication skills and partnering skills can be really utilized for big projects. I've actually thought about this. I've never thought about this before. I was like, maybe I should do that. So I think you got to really think about what you want to do exactly when you become a people leader. And are you ready to learn and grow in that field? And realize you might not be good at it and go back to IC and be okay with moving back.
Wow. Thanks for laying the hard truths for all of us. Yeah, I think so in summary, it's really finding out the reason why they want to probably move to a managerial position if they are currently coding and what they really enjoy and what they value in their work.
Yeah, there's also another thing which the article covered, which I think is another thing, is access. They think it unlocks some secret level of information and prestige and access in the company that they wouldn't get somewhere else. And I will tell you, I did this. I became a director of cloud services at Lexmark because I thought when I was over there, I didn't have access. And now I was like closer. And I realized in the company, like the CEO doesn't even have full control of the company. like in terms of like their ability to shift it, they're controlled by their shareholders, they're controlled by the business environment. There's so much stuff out of their control. So when I got in that position, I realized like climbing the ladder, the VP, SVP, CTO, CEO, the subdivision CEO, who I became friends with, like he didn't even have all the control. So if you're moving because you think you're going to get some extra level of control or some extra level of access because you don't think you have access as a technical, like that's also a worry, and it's a real phenomenon. That's real, right? This feeling of I'm not in the right meetings, I'm not decision making, right? And so I think you have to watch out for that too.
Yeah, I have a very interesting follow-up, I think, to your earlier answers. Maybe just to call back to the analogy or the example that you gave in regards to having a budget and you have to now sort of, what's that, budget between all your different engineers. In the case of a people manager, right, how do you balance out the needs of, like, in this case, your people versus the needs of the company? Like, when and where do you decide the company should come first versus the people?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that's the internal struggle of a people leader, right? Is that you're balancing the growth of your people and their desires with the needs of the team and the company, right? And you have to constantly weigh that, right? Because the ultimate is if the desires of your team is exactly the desires of your individuals, then you're going in the right direction, right? But like you might have, like, what if you have 3 people on your team that want to be managers and you only have 1 manager position or 0 manager positions, right? And so how do you balance all that? And I think, yeah, I mean, it's really a combination of, I think, of the company and the IC, right? First, understand what they're looking for and looking at what they're doing, and then look at what the company is putting you in and what position you are in, right? To shift. Actually, a lot of companies, you don't actually have that much control as a manager, right? Like in terms of this is your budget, this is how much you can give. You have no other choice. Like it's not like you could push and try to scrape an extra 5% off and give it to your people, but like sometimes you can't do that. That's just you're under a corporate structure, right? The other thing that I think managers forget is you could also move them out or have them look for another opportunity that will give them the chance. Like, don't think of your people as like yours, right? Think about like what's best for the company and for them. So what it may mean, the best thing is for them to leave your team and goes to another team. I actually just recently had someone do that, and it's celebrated. It's like, sweet, you found an awesome position over here where you're going to grow and do the thing you love, and that's okay, right? So I think, in that case, you may, the best thing for the company might be to let that engineer go find their career path somewhere else.
I think
I don't know if that answers it. So
I think, yeah, the answer itself, probably that's something more of also a self-exploratory thing, right? Probably everyone has a different way of looking at it, but I think that was a really insightful, and I also believe in similar methodology as that. Yeah, putting both the company and the people first, but in different ways that we can in our own positions.
By the way, my personal philosophy, just so you know, here's how I think. Like, relationship with your ICs and who report to you is forever. Where you are in a company is not. So if you think about that way, I'm not saying you should burn down your company for these individuals, right? But like, if you think about that way, like, I want to make sure that like the ICs that are under me or managers under me have a great career. It doesn't mean that they just work for me forever. So if you think about it in that way, the relationship is forever. Hopefully. And so that could help you balance it.
Just curious, maybe also a slight follow-up on that question. Just curious, like, how far back, or rather your relationships with the previous people that you manage, like what's the longest relationship you had so far? Maybe like 10, 15 years? Just curious.
20 since Marimba. So my tech lead, I co-founded a company with, we got acquired together. I worked for him. We still are friends. I mean, we don't work with each other anymore, but yeah, 21 years. Yeah. I mean, actually, my first job at Marimba, all my closest friends, everyone in my wedding party is from that company. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I'm gonna ask another follow-up question.
A lot of follow-ups.
Oh well, to the
just
earlier
kidding.
one, I think the question asked by Jiaxing was really interesting, and this one is
Yeah,
also another question pre-submitted. In let me see. Okay, so I think you are talking at one part of your answer. You were talking about challenge, it being a challenge to be able to, or rather, for companies, it's a challenge to be able to find the right people to place in the leadership positions in the first place. And it's also like in you get the poor situation where it's hard to also get people out because they are already in that position, the expectations are set.
Yeah.
So how can we prevent that as a company when we are interviewing? Like what should we look out for?
So the question here is how much coding a people manager needs to have. Is that the same question? I'm just seeing the question that's posted.
I was focusing more on the first part, but I think the second part is also another follow-up that the pre-submitted question had.
So once again, so this goes back to where your company's at. Depending on where your company's at, you might need a people leader that's more hybrid, right? Hands-on. I see a lot of these. I need a hands-on director, right? Like I actually just got a recruiting email. It says, I need a hands-on director. Here's the position. I'm like, okay. So yes, absolutely. Like depends on what your company's looking for. You might need a people leader that needs to be hands-on. To me, then don't call it people leader. Like, why are they a people? Like, I mean, that's me. I'm being facetious here. Like, yes, I understand there's needs for doing both, right? But like, let's not kid yourself. You're looking for a tech lead, basically, that maybe has some people responsibility. How good are they going to be at that? And maybe your expectation is that they don't need to be a good people leader. They just need to be a good tech leader. So then say that. Just be truthful to yourself about the position, right? I think the problem is we've like diluted the meaning of a people leader. We make it seem like something you could just do. Oh, I just hire someone off the street and they can be a great people leader. Like, that's not true. Like, this is like, I think I told you all before, I've said it before in so many, like people leadership is a craft that you have to grow and learn in just as well as technical. And I think that's the misnomer, right? So if you're looking for a people leader that needs to code, then I don't think you're looking for a people leader. I think what you're looking for is a technical leader who has some reporting responsibilities. And so just be truthful about it. Going back to how to interview, I think, it goes back to what are you looking for, right? So when I hired my people leader, they did have to have some technical abilities. So we did do screening. They didn't have to code. We actually gave them a spec, removed some of the details, and asked them to fill out the details of the spec, right? The second round was architecture. Go build Netflix this page. What would you do? And just draw out the pieces, right? And then just evaluated. It just goes back to like, okay, what dimension am I looking for? How technical do they need to be versus how good of a people leader versus how good of a partner? So that was the three things I was looking for: technical, partnership, and people leader. And then based on the interviews, I had one person who was like off the charts on the technical, but the partnership was not as strong. People leader, decent. And then complement to me was not as strong. They were just like me. But this other people was like, technical, pretty strong. Yes, not as good as the other one, but pretty strong. She like had like partnership experience and a fantastic people leader, and was a compliment to me. Like, had different skills than I had, and so that's why I hired her, right? And she's been fantastic. I mean, she's been an amazing leader, and actually quite really technical, actually. So, I think you have to really think about what you're looking for. Like so that's the 4 dimensions, that I was looking for, is how good are they as an actual people leader? That means growing ICs, one-on-ones, like career pathing, hiring, recruiting, all that stuff. Partnerships is dealing with partners, projects, prioritization, all that stuff. Technical is understanding enough about the technology to talk about it. And then 4 is how well do they complement the team and the skill sets of the team? And what are they adding or enhancing or growing of the team, right? And so if you look at those 4 dimensions, then you can say, okay, here's what I'm calibrating for. And so going back to, if you need a people leader who needs to code, then maybe your technical is what you really expect, and people leadership is just like a little bit. But then don't get surprised when a bunch of people leave or they're not good at one-on-ones. like be truthful to yourself of what you're actually looking for and what you need.
I just realized that Jasmine is missing. Let's add her back. Ta-da, hello.
Just kick her
Hello.
out.
People have been disappearing. Okay, this is also a challenge in balancing pre-submitted questions and live questions. There's a lot of live questions today.
Sure. I can
let's-
stay longer, by the way. I'm fine if you want to stay longer. It's up to you. Yeah.
That would be perfect if that's fine with. Okay, seems that it's fine with you. So maybe we can go and.
I mean, it's Saturday.
True.
No, and I was just gonna go home and watch Netflix. So
Oh. It's gonna be an 8 hours live stream.
I'm fine with staying a little longer. Just letting you know. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so
Thanks,
much for.
Bruce.
Yeah. So here's one pre-submitted question. The question is, have you broken trust before as a people manager? How did you deal with it? Would you have done it differently?
A big trust or little trust? I think if you break big trust, I don't think you can get it back. Big trust means like you violated some integrity, value, core value. You can't come back from that. Or at least that's my personal view. Little trust is more like projects or things you're doing, or maybe they've lost confidence in some area. And you know, I had that happen here, right? It's not lost the trust. It was just like we didn't have the right communication. I don't think I was doing right by the person on what they were looking to do for their career, and also not for their career, but for their project and their work. So I think I lost some trust because it was a misinterpretation of what I was looking for versus what they were expecting, right? And so in that, it was just like admitting you did something wrong, talking about it openly, and just trying to get to the root cause, right? And that's how you would deal with it. It's like, what exactly is it? Like, just get it out. Be candid about it, right? You did this in this meeting, and I like lost some faith in you because you said this. Well, if I don't know that, it's very hard for me to fix that, right? And that's the weird thing, is if you don't establish that ongoing trust or just discussion, you can't have those candid conversations. And so it's a little bit a tricky thing. So that's why if you break big trust, you can't come out of it, because they'll never tell you anything again. If you break little trust when it comes to like, hey, maybe a project did something bad, that's always repairable. And you just got to get down to the root, and you got to say the hard stuff. It was really hard for me to be like, man, I don't think we're actually talking right. And be vulnerable, like, man, I messed up. I think like, and it was awesome. My boss found out, right? That's how he found out. He was like, hey, I talked to them. They weren't happy with this thing. I'm like, what? What happened? And like, I freaked out. I was like, oh my God, that is not what I meant to happen. I was like, oh my gosh, that's really bad. And so then I, talked with them and tried to work it out, and just had a really open conversation. And it was super hard because it was also like still early on and hard to establish a relationship, and just got to keep on just building that relationship. Don't give up. Like, try to earn it back, or at least, reestablish it, or be very open. Like, hey, I messed up. I'm sorry. I mean, dude, I think great managers have to be super humble and super vulnerable. I think managers who like are full of themselves are just, I think, terrible people managers. And I think that's where you get a lot of the problems, right? take credit, don't believe, all that stuff that just people hear about as being terrible people managers.
Thank you.
I think a follow-up question to what Julius asked is Bruce, you talked about building trust with your team members. So I'm curious, like in a virtual environment, I would think it's more difficult to build trust. So what are some tips you have, like maybe in your one-on-ones with your team members? What do you usually discuss about? Are there any key questions that you'll ask?
Yeah. I spend about 5-10 minutes just catching up, and don't say how are you, right? Like they'll be like, oh, I'm fine, and then you're like, move on. Like ask something specific, like, oh, how did you? And then if they don't, like offer something personal about hey, oh man, this weekend was super tough, or like there's so much going on. You're like, oh, my kids had their birthdays and it was rough. Like I would sort of invite like the conversation. And then I sometimes ask, like, oh, how's this thing going? Oh, like, oh, your daughter, like, what's great is there? Like I'll like prompt something and try to get a little bit of information, understanding what their life is like and what they're dealing with, and just try to understand them, right, as a person. And I think, there's a little bit of Radical Candor, book, which talks about to be radically candid, you have to actually personally care about the person. Right. And I think that's where we start. Like, care about the human. It's not a transactional thing. Like, don't just start going into updates and why is the project late? Like, dude, that is not how you build a relationship, right? Like, they're an engineer, especially in this time of people are at school, their kids are not at school, they're at home and stuff's going on. Like, you got to open up a lot more space for like, how's it going? What's going on? And it doesn't mean you have to reveal like all the secrets. It's just more about caring about how they're doing as a human, and then understanding that leads you to like talk about the projects. And then, and even when you talk about the projects, maybe you want to like understand more about how they feel, right? Like, don't treat one-on-ones as a status update. That is like, don't, that's not what it is. It's a way to establish connection and understand what's blocking them, what's they're struggling with. Like, be curious about what they're working on. One of my and this goes back to actually the question of like, what happens when you're not an expert? Well, then be curious, ask, like and some of my engineers said, oh, like, you're really curious about what I do. And like, you seem to understand it and like want to know more. I mean, I geek out on tech stuff. Like, I don't do it anymore. So I'm really curious, like, let them explain their project, demo it to you. Care about what they do, dude, not about the task being done. And I think that just will make it a much better relationship than a transactional. And this goes back to crappy people leaders, right? Not crappy, sorry. I don't want to say crappy. People who are not refined and develop the skills. Because you're probably coding and you're not worried about how well to run one-on-ones. We're reading books, right? Because if you're coding all the time, you're not going to be able to read and grow as a leader. So.
Thanks a lot for that answer. I think one question that we have that's probably a bit linked as well. So as a people manager, how do you balance business needs and individual team members' growth? So were there any scenarios where you had to choose one over the other?
Yeah, I think it's similar to what Wei Yun said a little bit. I mean, I think the situations I typically get into is where someone wants to grow in a position we don't have, or in an area we don't need. And so in those cases, like for the business, it may be better to have them do something else, or go somewhere else, right? Or like join a different team. And I think I mentioned that to Wei Yun as well. Is like, hey, sometimes that's the best option. Is like balancing the business needs and the person needs. Maybe that the person should do something else, and then you can hire someone in the role that fits better. But I do have cases where like you get ICs go off and do some project that maybe not priority to what you're doing, and then you kind of have to like figure out, okay, how do I bring them back in and balance that out? Because what if they're like super desire is to like work on something else that's not related to what's priority to your team, and then you got to balance between like future stuff versus tactical stuff, right? So I've had to deal with that. And that's a tricky one. Like, you got to figure out the situation. Are you promoting sort of like exploration and innovation and trying things? Or do you really need to do a bunch of stuff? Do you have space to allow an engineer to go off and do stuff? Is it equal? Is that person the only one who's allowed to do cool stuff and then everyone else is doing the grunt stuff? So then I have to like rebalance and kind of move things around. And so that's something where I've struggled with a little bit, where the team needs were not exactly what the ICs wanted to do. So not something like, oh, I want to be a manager, I don't have a manager position, right? Like it's not that. It was more like, oh, I want to work on this. It has nothing to do with the team or not as related. And I think it's just having open conversation about what impact are you making for the company? And if you're making great impact, then maybe go ahead. But then at some point, if it's not affecting the team at all, then maybe you need to like find a team where you can use that impact and affect the business, right? So I think you look out for the business when you put the IC in the right place. And that may not be on your team or at the company.
Thanks, Bruce. That's a lot of considerations you need to take into.
Yeah, that's why these questions, it's very hard. Like, I would need to know the situation, what you're dealing with, company culture, boss culture, and all that stuff. But I think general, there's some good answers there. Like, it's tough for a lot of these situations because I obviously can read subcontext to some of these questions.
Okay, so I actually slightly interested to follow up actually on the question before, where you were relating on maybe I would say some tips about one-on-one. And I think you mentioned about part of it, you shouldn't focus on getting status updates from the people that you are doing your one-on-ones with, and you should focus on like being curious about like who they are, what they stand for, and get to know them better. Just want to like ask, what about the reverse? Do you recommend people managers when they do their one-on-ones to also use it as an opportunity to be able to let the engineers know about certain information? Like for example, let's say plans that the companies are going into, sort of to involve them, maybe in some sense.
Oh yeah, I mean, especially with Netflix culture, where transparency and context over control is super important. I find different ways to communicate that, right? Like I send out a newsletter, I'll do team meetings, I'll send emails, pings. Definitely when it like warrants like discussion and deeper connections. Like, oh, I heard this team was doing this and I heard this project. What do you think about that? Like, don't do it just be like, oh, by the way, did you know this, like that's, weave it into the conversation about like what they're doing and how that impacts them, right? And so absolutely, I think if they're giving an update, you're getting update and information about like some projects and how something's going, and then about something else, you might want to add that, like, oh, by the way, I heard this thing, or this is going on over there. Have you talked to them? I do that a lot. My one of my teammates, he's presenting at QCon about WebAssembly. This is the project he's working on. That's like, what's this have to do with the team exactly? And like, and there is, but it doesn't look like it. And he's going to present about server-side WebAssembly as a way to build federated GraphQL. And he's struggling with like, not struggling, but he's like, how do I write the right topic? And I'm like, oh, your coworker like is a super strong presenter. He like loves presenting. Maybe you guys should talk one-on-one and get some ideas. Oh, and by the way, here's another project you should probably work on together. Oh, by the way, you also need to work on this other project together. So it's like win-win-win if you talk. And then I talked to the engineer, and oh, by the way, can you help Gabriel with this thing? And it was like, that was it. And so it was connecting the dots too of like, oh, hey, you're struggling with this thing, and this engineer over there is actually really good with the thing that you need, And so it's also connecting people because sometimes you become the source of information, which also is a problem. Because what I noticed is a lot of information is coming through me. So I was getting context from all the team, but the team wasn't sharing context with each other. And so then I identified like, oh crap, we need to like meet as a team and talk about this. So when I got updates, I'm like, recognize, you know what? We need to hold a team meeting and discuss this topic because we don't have alignment on the team about the subject. So you need to be able to like, yes, it's definitely, I mean, it's an art, right? To run one-on-ones, and you just got to get a feel for it, and there's not, I can't give you a single formula. It's people,
I think it's still really good though, right? Connecting the dots, creating win-win relations for everyone, and making sure people talk to each other. I think that's really awesome.
Yeah, don't become the informational bottleneck. And definitely don't hold information as a power. That's what a lot of bad managers do, by the way, is hold information. Holding information is super powerful because you know something they don't know. Ooh, then you have a terribly performing team if you do that. So, yeah. I should just interview managers and tell you if they're good or bad. What do you think? That should be a service. Have your manager talk to me and I'll tell you if you're screwed or not. That'll be a new service you can offer.
That's the next startup idea.
Vet a manager. Vetamanager.com. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead. I feel like there's some stuff going on that people want to figure out. So yeah.
I think definitely assessing whether a person is a good manager or not, it's definitely something that we require. And being a good manager is definitely, as you say, it's an art. It's also a very hard skill to acquire. Yeah, definitely need a lot of experience for that.
Yeah, you have to make mistakes. You have to be. I've been a terrible manager before, just so you know. To be full, I mean, I've been very bad, and people have left because of me. So that's how you learn, right? You figure out, oh my gosh, I was a terrible manager, and like reading stories and reading books and understanding where my flaws were. And a lot of it was because I was the technical lead. And it was just like a weird dynamic. Yeah. Anyways, that's a separate.
Okay, I have a separate. Okay, so in the audience questions, we have actually one question that's actually quite different in terms of context, and
Sure.
I think in line with today's discussion, so I'm bringing it up. So Amit is asking in regards to things that you look out for in terms of, let's say, for junior, even a senior engineer, that joins a company. What should they focus on in terms of technical and non-technical skills?
I mean, there's a lot to look for. I think one of the most common things that we always look for is curiosity. It's probably one of the strongest indicators of how good someone's going to be. So how curious are they? What's their desire to learn? Like how when you ask someone technical or non-technical and you dig one level deeper or two levels deeper and you figure out how much they really know and how curious were they about something, or did they go the extra mile, right? I think that's really important. There's a saying where a teacher teaching computer engineering knew like how good the engineer was going to be if they delineated between tabs and spaces in their editor, like that they were curious enough to like figure out like, oh, is this spaces or tabs? There's the adage of if you have a non-traditional browser, someone will be better because they're curious enough to be like, oh, what's this thing? Oh, Firefly. What is that? Oh, Brave. What is that? Like, oh, what does that do? The curiosity is almost like a proxy for where their growth trajectory will be, right? The difference between junior and senior, when it comes to like, I think the ultimate is, so curiosity is the base core aspect that I think you have to have. But then what really separates is communications. The non-technical stuff, actually, usually senior engineers are just better at the non-technical things. like communications, prioritization, like EQ, empathizing, listening. Like there's these skills, because in a more complicated development environment requires you to interact with a variety of teams and a variety of individuals. And so if you were just lone coder super person, it just won't work in a company of any scale, right? So usually the more senior has those communicate, like I would expect they're able to communicate, they're succinct, right? They're able to like explain complicated concepts. One of the biggest things is really hard concept explained simply is a really strong indicator of how much they actually know about that subject, right? And so, with technical, like, sure, there's always things like, we give a take home and we have like a bunch of dimensions that we look for. Do they do tests? Does the thing work? Like, does it scale? Does it handle errors? Like, there's all these things. I'm actually telling you now what we look for. But, there's like very technical things we look for, because we expect you, as you get more senior, you look for all the more faults and you understand where the thing breaks and where it falls down. Junior is like, oh, it works, it's good. But it's like, how does it handle errors? How does it handle that load? Like, what's it do with weird situations? Like, what about maintenance over many, many years? Like, there's those things that only senior engineers have seen and done that gives them that extra level. What skills are needed to focus in the tech overwhelming world? I really think the thing that, and it's maybe it's because of what we deal with here, is like listening is really hard. And empathy, true empathy, is really hard. Like, that's why I want to start doing more pairing rotations, where you go inside a team, work with them for a few months, and come out. Because just no one really understands each other's side, right? I literally just today, like, two sides are talking about like the same problem, but like coming from totally different angles. And so that ability for someone to like really understand the situation and the other side and like be able to juggle between the two sides, it's a really hard skill. And I'm talking about a ton of super senior engineers here where we still struggle with this, right? Where you're coming from your side and you're right, and they're coming from their side and they're also right. And so you're talking over each other because you're both right. And so I think that skill is super hard. And it's not easy. So, I mean, there's a lot. Like, if you go look at our culture deck with the memo, I can read you what is really important for engineers or anyone to work at Netflix, but I think anywhere. And those values, super important, right? Judgment, communication, curiosity, courage, passion, selflessness, innovation, inclusion, and integrity, and impact, right? Like, those are all the skills you need. I mean, there's a lot in there, but you need a lot of those. So it's very hard to say what's the one skill. I mean, a lot of skills needed. And so I would encourage you to read. If you go to jobs.netflix.com/culture, you'll read, like, what does it mean, right? Are you able to inspire people? Are you able to think of create new ideas? Are you inclusive and able to collaborate? Do you make impact? I mean, there's all these things that are expected of you that are fundamental to succeeding at pretty much any company.
Cool. I think we definitely need to get that link and share with our audience later as well. Yeah. And I think many parts of the answers in regards to listening empathy, I think that's also something I very much agree in. I think I recently read a book that talks about this, being that a big part of communication occurs on the end of the listener. So you have to understand what they are, how they are understanding your statement, and look from their POV. Yeah, so I think that's really the answer.
Yeah, and I mean, that's why when I say communication skills, I don't mean presentation skills, right? I mean the other stuff. How well are you able to communicate with your fellow peers? How are you able to communicate when they don't agree with you? That's the key. Are you able to give each other proper feedback? Can you listen to their side? Do you understand? Have empathy? But then can you make a choice that maybe you're not trying to get consensus? right? Like there's all these things that you have to balance, right? Like, because you could also go too far. You just listen, and you don't make any decisions. You're so empathetic that you can't actually make the tough calls because you don't want to hurt someone's feelings. Well, sometimes you're going to have to, right? So everything's a balance. And I think that's also a marquee of someone more senior versus junior. Is what I only have a very simple definition of a senior engineer. And I actually ask this question all the time, is do they understand the nuance of software engineering? There is no one right solution. There is no one thing. There's nothing. There's no one great language. The moment they say that, it's like, nope. But do you understand the nuance of when do you write too many tests? When do you have to stop refactoring? When do you have to give up on a technical solution or a technical route? How far do you push your idea versus pulling back? Like, how long do you run a project before you like move to the next architecture? When do you introduce a new architecture? When do you introduce a new technology? When do you pick between switching from this language to that? When do you discard this language? Like, it's all the nuance of understanding the trade-offs between making every decision and understanding the positive and negatives of that decision. And that's it. More senior you are, you just see more and you know more and you just can account for all these things better. I know it's a simple answer, but that's my answer.
Oh, Julius, I think you're on mute.
Oops, I was saying it's getting dark here in Singapore, even if it's noon. Okay, so we have another pre-submitted question. So the question is around engineering managers. So do they have to be organized around the tech platform, or from your perspective, or should it be around the product squad?
Yeah, I've heard of both models. I think you'll traditionally see more around the tech because, like I'm not a UI engineer, right? So like if you have me lead a UI engineer and you ask me to recruit a UI engineer, like I could probably do it, but like I don't have all the context and nuance and I don't understand that field deeply, right? And so I think you see, even when you have content, you have the Spotify squad model. Typically what happens, even a squad model, the squad model is a virtual team owned by a product owner. And then the manager stripes across the technology, right? So you have a manager that like has all the UI engineers and then they go into different squads, right? But there are definitely cases where you might, if you're a smaller company, you just kind of manage the whole team and then you run the whole team, right? And that's okay. I just think that over time, like, as you get bigger, you start specializing, which means then your management starts specializing, and then you have domains that start specializing, right? That's why we have VPs of backend, front end, platform, data, right? Because as you get bigger, the specialization gets more and more specific, and you have to have that skill set. And so I think early on it probably doesn't matter, but as you grow, you'll see it's very rare you'll see that kind of squad model management scale out. I think it's very much like a domain, right? Now, if your domain has both UI backend engineers, I mean, that's okay. So I don't know if it's the question of like, is it possible to have both? It's like, yes. Which one is better? It depends on your situation.
Yeah, I think it does make sense depending on the scale of the company and what they do.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Passing over to Jasin.
Bruce, so I think you covered the first point earlier in your presentation about your career path. Really interesting journey, all the startups and then the big companies. So at what point did you feel like you needed a change? Maybe like what motivated you to move? And I think the follow-up one would be, if you could redo your career all over again, what would you do differently?
Oh my God, it's so hard. So going back to how I made a change, there are certain cases when the company or leader breaks my trust or expectations of what a good leader is, then I would move. In other cases, I think it's more like a desire. You know, when I worked at Marimba, I always wanted to start a company, right? I was always been kind of a mix of engineer plus business person. And so I was like, oh man, I really want to start a company. I want to do this. And it just stuck in my head. And you just got to do it, right? It goes back to like, if there's just some overwhelming desire, you guys just got to pull the trigger and you don't want to regret, right? And so I think that was how I'd made that decision. Other times is like, usually it's like a step function growth of like, oh man, this is an opportunity that lets me like take a huge step in my experience or capabilities, right? And so then it's like too good of an opportunity to turn down, right? Other cases, it's like, oh sweet, I want to work for a company based in Norway so I can travel to Norway. And it was awesome. I mean, I like the people too, and I like the technology, but it was like, man, I've never been to Norway. I don't know how tech teams work in Norway. I don't even know the startup scene in Norway. Where is Norway? And, you know, I had a great experience there. You know, it didn't work out, but it was an amazing experience. And so it was an opportunity that's super unique, right? Working for a European company that was going to have based in SF and needed that kind of culture. But then also I got to experience what it was like over there. And, you know, all three other founders, like really good friends of mine, right? So, you know, it's definitely different like ideas of like, hey, you know what? This is like time to move on. Like, hey, maybe I'm not making impact that I want, or I'm doing the thing I want. Or it's a very unique situation that like I couldn't turn it down, right? I mean, I showed you earlier like what would it take for me to like leave Netflix. Like I'm like, it's pretty amazing here. It would have to be something like really spectacular and like different, right? Like I've told people like if it was CEO of a company, that's something I've never done. That's that step function growth, right? Like, okay, if I could be CEO of a company, that's probably the only thing of a decent sized company, right? That I would like even consider. So, yeah.
Oh, thanks. So if anyone is
what I
looking
would do
to
differently-
hire Bruce,
Yeah, sorry.
that's your answer.
Yeah, as your CEO, no. And I don't have actually a ton of lots of experience with that, so I mean that's gonna be hard, right? And I don't want to go build that ladder where I need to go do a bunch of stuff to get. I mean, I love my job right now, so it's more like an opportunity that it just presents itself. In terms of what I would do differently, man, I would. If I could do differently, I would have told myself to like, you should have tried to get into Netflix earlier. Like you should have joined this company way earlier when you read about the culture and you never like thought to apply. I would probably tell myself like, man, it would have been awesome to see us. Because my coworkers tell me about when they celebrated the 1 million disc party, when they shipped 1 million discs. And they told me the 1 million subscriber party and the 20 million subscriber party and the 50 million subscriber party and the 100 million subscriber party. And we recently had a 200 million subscriber party. So that would have been awesome. And I think of all my experiences, you know, like Netflix is like truly like a special company. And so I think I would have told myself like, man, you should have tried earlier.
Still not too late. I think Wei Yuan has one last question. Yeah.
So I think as a sort of a roundup for today's event, like we heard a lot of good advice, a lot of good anecdotes, examples. What final advice would you give our audience in terms of their career advancement?
This sounds like from like a, you know, some like meditative book, but don't let others' paths influence you. Like find your own path. Like I think the problem with humans is that you're not happy when you're comparing up. And I was not happy when I did that, right? When I started my startup, it was like, oh man, we can't look at all these companies getting funding. And I sold my startup. Like, look at all these companies selling for way more. Like, if you keep on looking and comparing to someone else doing better, you're just never going to be happy no matter where you are. So I think it's really important to carve out your path that makes sense for you, and don't let the like what you think you should do drive you. And you know, I know how Asian societies work with expectations around careers and growth and prestige. It's very hard to remove that from your brain, right? Because you feel like this obligation to go for a big company, no risk, like, and I think what I would do is stop comparing with others and figure out your path that makes sense for you, right? And you, what I should have showed you is you're going to find every kind of company out there at every different level, at every different thing, and figure out what, if your situation is, hey, you need financial stability, then find that. If you're past that and you want like excitement and different, and you can take risk, or you're willing to take risk early because you don't have a family, do that, right? You look at me, don't compare to me, right? Go figure out your own path, right? And make what makes sense to you, because if you go compare up, you're just not going to be happy, right? And it was like only until I realized recently that, you know what, I'm just going to be happy with what I have. It's actually pretty good, right? And I'm content now, right? And I am doing pretty well. And it's like, I now work for Netflix, and people want to invite me to things like this, and it's amazing. But I think ultimately it's like I just have to be happy with what I have and where I am in my life. And if you're not, make a change, but don't do it because of someone else. I think it's really important to find your own path. And tech is like so open that you can do that.
I think that's a really great advice for our audience out there. So drawing parallels is good, but I think it's important to find your own way, your own journey.
No.
And sorry.
No,
okay, so
go ahead.
So I think we've reached the end of today's session, and I think that was a really, really good discussion, as well as the Q&A. Like, this was a lot of good advice, information for our audience. So I think representing our audience and GDG groups, developer space, as well, the audience out there. So thanks, Bruce, for joining us today for today's event. Yay!
It was awesome as always.
So Julius, would you like to transit to the I think the end announcements?
Oh, okay. Let's do it. Thank you once again, Bruce. Always happy to have you back next time. And if you're hiring, no kidding. We want stability, Okay.
Yeah.
Just.
Actually, I wouldn't come to Netflix if you want stability. It's pretty fun. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks. All right. So just some final announcement. Again, Android is coming up. Please stay tuned on subsequent announcement. We'll have a lot of very interesting talks leading to Google I/O. So please hang in there, follow us on social media, and then you kind of get updated more. That said, we are also looking for people to speak. So please do submit your proposals in the link, and we'll contact you as soon as possible. And once again, subscribe. We love your likes. We love your subscription. Get notified, blah, blah, blah. And if you haven't visited our new website, please do come and visit. There we post past events, subsequent events. So there you can have a very easy aggregated list of all the events that you can access. With that, that's it. So see you next event, and have a very, very good Saturday. Bye-bye.